Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. Happy Valentine's Day! Okay, a couple of announcements. If you weren't listening to the first hour of the show, Just Energy Radio can be heard live every Thursday evening on the Inception Radio Network. You can also come to the Inception Radio Network webpage to listen to the archives, or you can go to justenergyradio.com and access our over 6 years worth of archives. Also go to our YouTube channel, Just Energy Radio on YouTube. And that's Ms. Bitsy saying Happy Valentine's Day to all of you guys, too. Hold on one second. Because she's just special. She just wants some of the loving that we're going to be having in this second hour. Okay. Well, we'll just skip all the rest of it. Oh, if you're interested, we're doing a trip to Peru where we're going to be like tuning into ancestral spirits and really cool stuff. Go to Just Energy Radio webpage or soulhealer.com. Click on the big banner that says Peru tour and check it out, soulhealer.com. But let me tell you a little bit about my guest for this hour. It's Tracy Brown. Tracy and I have known each other for a very long time. She's totally cool. But let me do the official bio thing and we'll get her on the air. Tracy Brown is president of Diversity Trends, LLC. She's the author of Breaking the Barrier of Bias, 71 Ways to Demonstrate Commitment to Diversity, and several audio listening programs, including Diagnosis Diversity. Since 1991, she has worked with clients that range from well-known Fortune, I'll say 500 companies. The webpage says Fortune 50 companies, Fortune 500 companies, to community-based nonprofit organizations. So from TracyBrown.com. Tracy Brown. Hey, Miss Tracy, how are you?
Hey, Dr. Rita. I am great and having a great day, and this is just going to make it better.
Well, okay. Well, you know, when you try to navigate over a dog that's laying on your desk, it's a little challenging sometimes. You know, usually it's the cat. You know, today it's the dog. Ms. Bitsy.
They just all want the love.
They just want the love. And with it being Valentine's Day, you know, she already had like this big red cookie, you know, because Valentine's Day has to be red. Dog cookie for all those, you know, animal lovers out there. Anyway, Tracy, your background has really revolved around diversity in the workforce. You know, how did you get into that whole field in the first place?
Well, it's so funny. Sometimes I say, well, it started when I was 2 years old. I was being prepared. I'm African American, and my parents moved our family into what up to that time had been an all-white neighborhood. And I really did start learning from the age of 2 or 3 how to navigate in a multicultural environment. And it's all of that learning to do it without being taught, you know, without it being academic, of building bridges cross-culturally and going in and out of different situations that really prepared me. But I do have a degree in business communications, and I have a degree in performing, which actually helps with the training that I do with organizations. And I spent 18 years in organizations as a manager and then as a vice president of human resources. So the people issues in organizations and how people find themselves challenged by those who are different from them is something I've always experienced, but then also have professional experience related to.
Well, and listening to your talk about the concept of diversity, I think when most people think of diversity, they think of it along racial lines only. You know, like, well, how do we get the black employees to get along with the white employees, to get along with the, you know, Asian employees in that way? But it almost sounds like you're talking about it in a bigger picture of how can we all get along regardless of race, creed, or color, or sexual bias, preference?
Yeah, because diversity really is about more than race. Now, we often are uncomfortable talking about race, and we get emotional about it. And, it is a specific conversation. But if we have people, a lot of times now when I go in organizations, it's all about generations. So the workforce that's, age 20 to 32 has very different perceptions and values and expectations than the baby boomers who are all, now in their 50s and 60s. And there's a lot of conflict. So if we can learn to navigate the conflict, whether it's over race or sexual orientation or religion or politics or age and generations, if we can learn it in one area, we can then apply those skills to our relationships in every other area.
I think it's really interesting that is the new area, this generational thing. My brain goes, well, you mean you just can't go backhand them, like your kid? Which I'm sure is going through some of the older employees' minds.
And quiet as it's kept, it's going through some of the younger employees' minds as well. Like, could I just hit this person? Could I just take them out? They're very skilled. That generation is very skilled in gaming, and, they've been exposed to a lot of ways. Like, can I just press a button and make that old person shut up?
But I did never really think of it. But, younger people really do have a very different skill set.
Yes.
But then they have a very different set of expectations, which I personally don't understand. But, different set of expectations than the baby boomers who are, go in, work hard, get your pay.
Well, and some part of that is really interesting to me is that we often think we need to understand. If I could understand that group or people from that group that's different from my own, then it would be all okay. And to some degree, that's true. And I'll give an example of that in just a second. But really, sometimes it's a matter of simply accepting that if I build a relationship and if I'm working with this person and they're different from me, I just need to ask them, or I need to be open to the fact that they are going to do some things differently. And I can ask them about that and I can accept it. It doesn't have to be the exact same way that I do it, as long as we get the work done or as long as we achieve our goal. And can I share an example with you?
Sure.
So the example that came to mind is under both the can we all get along and then also understanding. I was one of the co-founders in the Dallas area of an organization called Dallas Dinner Table. And the dinner table process was that there would be dinners all on the same night all over the metropolitan area with 8 to 10 people sitting down talking to each other. And the participants at the dinners were assigned so that there would be a mix by age or gender or ethnicity. And the conversations were all around race, because race is the one that's hardest for most people to talk about. And what has been your experience in your life? What's been the impact of race in your life? And so to have people from different ethnic groups or to have people from the same ethnic group but different generations talking about how they perceive it, what they've experienced, it did create a deeper level of connection and understanding. So then when you go to work or you read something in the newspaper that's a generalization, you go, well, wait a minute. That's a generalization, but I met Rita Louise, and she's not like that, even though she's a part of that group. So I'll take it with a grain of salt that I before would have just believed. So the dinner table process, or just having, those experiences where you have authentic conversations with people who are different from you, go a really long way in helping you navigate a world where there are people who are so different from one another working together or living next door to each other.
It's interesting, and it just kind of blows me away a little bit that people just have such a hard time in accepting somebody for being a person. Okay, now there are certain things that really piss me off, and I mean, like stupid people, they piss me off. I'm sorry, and, but I recognize that. And I'm sure, well, whatever. But just because a person is black or Asian or a woman or gay, I mean, I just can't even believe that there's really that big of a problem in that area.
Well, I get surprised. About 40% of the corporate business that I do is training, and I'm surprised at how often, the reason I get invited to come in to an organization is because of inappropriate comments that are being made and about groups, generalizations or stereotypes, or and we think a lot of the time in general in our culture, we think, oh, that's, that was how it was back in the 40s or the 50s, or even, during the civil rights movement in the 60s and early 70s. That's so long ago. But in reality, a lot of that still happens today. And it's sad. But it does still happen. There are still workplaces where black employees get threatened or teased with somebody thinking it's funny to put a noose, a symbol of lynching, in their work area or in their locker, or draw it on a piece of paper and, leave it on their desk. We still have people making comments about, in a lot of our large organizations where there are technology departments, there may be a lot of employees who are Indian or Asian in descent, and, people commenting, oh, don't go to lunch. Don't go to lunch when they're eating because the food they cook smells a certain way. And, there's judgment, and much of it just comes from lack of exposure. So what we can do, it's up to each one of us to say, I know that everybody is worth being respected, and I will treat everyone with respect, even if I don't understand them, and even if I've never met anyone from that group before.
Hey, so I was turned into EEO once.
Really?
I was. For picking on this guy. Story. So I worked with in this engineering department, and one of the managers they used to call her the Wicked Witch of the Wings. That was her nickname. And so he worked for her, and he was doing her typing. Okay, now this was a designer, a PC designer, and he was doing her typing. So I was giving him a bad time and it wasn't against him. It was more that she was getting him to do this stupid work. And I'm like, Dennis, why don't you get me a cup of coffee? Hey, Dennis, can you take a memo? And so they turned me in. And so it was hysterical. So they take me down. I have to go meet with the EEO guy. So the EEO guy is this 6'4" African-American gentleman. He goes, do you know why you're here? And I'm like, no. And he goes, do you know Dennis Pham? And I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Yeah. And so he goes, well, there have been reports that you've been harassing him. And I said, well, all I've been saying to him is, will you get me a cup of coffee? Will you, take a memo? And he goes, well, you're not supposed to say that. And I'm like, I'm an equal opportunity harasser. I don't discriminate. And he just cracked, or he tried not to laugh really hard. And he goes, just don't do that anymore. And I said, okay.
It's like, please stop. Yes.
And then we spent the next 50 minutes talking about college, talking about sports, because I guess he had to make it seem like he was reprimanding me or something. Mm-hmm. Because I was in there for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
That was our whole conversation.
Well, what's really humor is that's a great example, because humor is one of the things that doesn't translate well always, and humor often in the workplace, especially, humor often gets people in trouble. And the whole pattern is really supposed to be designed in the workplace where, well, if that is true, that somebody tells you about it, so you have an opportunity to either learn from it or just stop the behavior. But it does make it really uncomfortable sometimes because you're just like being funny, and anybody who knows your sense of humor would know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Just
so
being a brat.
and so but it is hard, and I think that it goes back to the less we know about people, especially people who are different from us, and that could even just be as simple as introvert or extrovert. But when people are different from us, if we evaluate them based on I expect you to be just like me, then we're going to always be in conflict. But if I evaluate you based on, let me get to know you and understand where you're coming from and how we can, where we overlap and where we don't, then we can build a relationship and we can work together, or we can work together to serve our customers or clients, or, whatever it is that we're trying to do together.
It just seems like the more politically correct we become, it's almost like we're getting more cranky, and more aggravated with each other. What's going on with that?
Oh, so you just hit one of my pet peeves, and that's and that's just the phrase politically correct. Even though it's not that I never use it, but what's happened, I think, is we've created this idea that being respectful is not is making, in order for me to be respectful to you, then I have to shut myself down. Like political correctness makes it seem like, in order for me to give you respect, I have to shut who I am down. And that's really not what the intention should be. Now, there are some organizations I've gone into as a consultant, and I'm like, yeah, you're telling people they can't talk that, and you're not giving them any opportunity to get to know each other. And so then it's just a bunch of rules. But in reality, when I look at the world and when I'm working with clients, whether they're one-on-one clients or a company, I'm always saying, you know what? It's a both and. So if you would not want people to say or do things that make you feel less than or devalued. And so you don't want to do that to other people because you don't want people to do it to you. And the more different people I work around, it's like, okay, I need to learn what they're going to consider disrespectful or offensive, because I'm not here to do that. I'm not here to offend anybody. We're here to get a job done. Mm-hmm. And we don't take the time in the U.S., we're always moving so fast, we forget. And we evaluate everything and everybody based on our own filters unless we intentionally choose to look beyond that.
Okay, so I have a question, and this is like a totally politically incorrect question, but Good. I like being politically incorrect. So,
yes.
So why do black people have an issue with being called black people? Why do you have to call them African Americans?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. So, what's really interesting is it depends on what part of the country you're in. Really. So
okay, talk to me about it.
Yeah. So I'm black and I'm African American, and I use them both a lot. And sometimes it's not a political thing for me. So sometimes I use African American, but a lot of times I use black because it's fewer syllables and it's faster.
Yeah.
But I speak on this right all over the country. So what happens? I've learned is that for example, in North Carolina, Florida, like the southeast on the coast. In general, more black people prefer black and not African American. But if you come into Atlanta, and Memphis, and it's definitely African American. So The question that comes up all the time is kind of related to that. It's, well, what word is the right word to use? So, and it's not just Black African American, it's Hispanic, Latino, Chicano, Mexicano, Puerto Rican, in that Hispanic Latino group. In different parts of the country, I get pushback about white versus Caucasian versus Euro-American, which you don't hear very much, but I've had people tell me. So the whole thing is, I don't get to decide what to call you. I don't get to decide out of my comfort level or out of my preference what you want to be called. And the you being you personally, or, you as a group of people. So what I've learned is, in different parts of the country, if I'm going to a meeting or to speak, I will start with kind of what is the general standard that is set by the government categories. So that would generally be African American, white, Hispanic, Asian American, Pacific. So, or Asian Pacific. But I always ask, the company I'm at, the HR manager, or some of the employees, if I get to meet people before I speak, I'll ask 5 or 6 people. And if I don't get to do that, then as I speak or as I'm leading training in the first 30 minutes, I will actually use more than one term. Now, I won't try to use every term I know, because that's a little silly, but I'll use more than one term so that people understand that I do know there's more than one term. But if I just meet you, or if I'm talking to you, I will ask you. I will ask people, and it's okay to do that. We think it's not okay to ask, that it'll be offensive to ask. But when it's a genuine question, there are a lot of adjectives that are used, and what do you prefer? And if I know that about you, then that's the one that I will use.
Well, I mean, Jamie put this comment in the chat room, and it kind of echoes my thought. And he put, they call us white, we call our own selves white.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes on, but I think Black is easier to say than colored or African. I'll add the American on there. And actually, in my new book, I talk about the god. So, Cortez came to America, and Montezuma thought that Cortez was the god Quetzalcoatl returned. But when you describe who they were waiting for, what their image of Quetzalcoatl was, and I'm doing presentations on this, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be politically incorrect, but, he was this white guy with a long beard and these long flowy robes. I mean, what am I going to say? Well, he was this Caucasian man. I mean, it's not even really talking about race. It's just, it's just fact. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. And, we get tied up in it. But one of the things that gave me perspective is remembering that just even in my lifetime, the names changed. The names have changed. They change, generationally or every so many decades anyway. And it's specifically talking about the labels for Black folks in America. When I was very young, it was Negro, and being called Black was really an insult, or, a little offensive, depending on how it was said. And, Black didn't become popular until the late 60s, early 70s, during the civil rights movement that then transformed into the Black Power movement. And, Black is beautiful, and say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. And at that time, I was old enough to notice that the older generations were just angry, no, nobody's ever going to call me Black, because when they were young, when they were little, it really was a pejorative.
Yeah.
Right. It was, oh, little Black boy, come over here and do this, or I got my boy who, to drive me or to to do this, to clean my yard. And it really was a pejorative. It was a slam. So in the late 60s, early 70s, when it started becoming the norm, the older folks in their 70s, 80s, 90s were like, no one will ever call me that. I am a Negro. And so, then as it morphed into African American, that came from the Black community itself saying, we want, to have this connection. They're Italian Americans. Everybody gets to honor their heritage from other continents. There are a lot of folks who are like, no, don't want to be called African American because I didn't, my parents, my direct descendants didn't come from Africa. And a lot of people today who are Jamaican, whose grandparents are Jamaican or came from some other country, still don't resonate with African Americans. So there is no one right one. There is no one right label for any group.
Or if you're somebody like me, it's like, you don't got enough time for me to go through the whole list, blah, 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 American.
Exactly.
At the end.
Yes. So we don't want it. What I often suggest to people is don't get so hung up on the names, but you don't get to decide based on just what is your personal preference. You really, to be respectful, would be deciding based on what the recipient, who you're talking to or about, what they prefer, knowing that 10 years from now, it could be something different. And it's like, okay, I'm not attached. I'm, not attached to the label. And I also want to know what is considered offensive because to this day, we still have, there's a lot of controversy over the N word for a lot of reasons. One, because some people grew up and that's what they heard and they didn't even realize it was offensive. And another whole generation, the whole generation that listens to hip hop music, has heard the N word in their music and used it as it's just kind of slang. And they get in the workplace and they are like, hey, and they're using it and they don't understand why people get upset.
Well, anymore, that word is almost up there with, actually, it's worse than the F word.
Yes, it is. In our current day, right now, in this time and space, in this decade, it is. But all of the ethnic slurs, racial and ethnic slurs, can get you in a lot of trouble. And, even if you are hearing them in slang or in music, in our day-to-day environment, there's still racial and ethnic slurs. And I just don't believe that people get up in the morning and decide, I'm going to go to work, or I'm going to go to shopping, or I'm going to go to church, or I'm going to, I don't believe people get up and say, let me see how many people I can offend today. I just don't think that the majority of us take that on as our mission for the day.
Let me ask you this question. When you talk about that, we were talking about the generation thing, and you're talking about hip hop music and they're being exposed to all of this stuff. I remember, this is a true story. I remember there were these two black girls. We were, how old was I? Maybe second grade. And they lived in our building. We lived in New York City. And I would come out and we would play this Chinese jump rope game thing together. And I remember my mom came over one day. She goes, oh, it's so nice that you play with these little black girls. Mm-hmm. And I never really understood it until, like 30 years later, what she was actually, what that comment actually meant. Because the civil rights movement hadn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. None of this had happened yet. And, but today it's like, you go to California and if you are, if I'm going to say you're American, I'll just say American,
right.
You're in the minority. And so younger people are being brought up in this very diverse
Yes.
ethnic background. Do you find that it's less of an issue with younger people because it's just their life, or do we still have the same kind of problem?
Sadly, we still have the same kind of problem, and I'm surprised. I think 20 years ago, I was like a lot of people saying, "Oh, all of this is going to fix itself because every generation has more exposure, and it's just going to go away." But what happens is that our young people have exposure through the internet, but it's not personal exposure. And then in some parts of our country, in our nation, in the U.S. and in Canada, and actually all over the world, there are some places that really are multi-ethnic if we look at ethnicity for a minute. And, and there is some more personal exposure. But then they are still, our young people go to church or they go to school or then they get a job. And the people who they have to please, and the people who are their role models, are still carrying over the behavior they got from the generation ahead of them and ahead of them. And so it's really shocked me how often when I go into companies and the workplace, that there'll be young people and I'll talk to them and they'll say, well, I don't really have a personal discomfort with people from group A, B, or C, but they're not. But then they tell me the same stereotypes that their boss or their boss's boss or people from 10 or 15 years ago would have said, because that's what they've been told. And that's, they've been told that, and that's what they look for. And so it's like, oh, but if I'm going to hire someone, I'm not going to hire anybody like this, like A, B, or C. I'm going to look for someone who's X, Y, and Z, who looks just like me. Or who.
Okay, I'm going to split a hair here for a second then. Because is it because they're having an issue because the individuals they're dealing with are, again, another politically incorrect statement, foreigners, that they were not American citizens. So, maybe English is their second language, et cetera, et cetera. Is that where the discrimination is versus they're Hispanic, perhaps? Because myself, I'm half Hispanic, I'm half Puerto Rican. I went to Catholic school with a bunch of Irish kids. I learned how to do the Irish jig. How white can you get? And I consider myself a white person. And when, and I go to places sometimes and they'll be like, walk up to me and start talking to me in Spanish. And I'm like, white girl, very white girl,
Like they're looking at you going, but you look like you should be able to speak Spanish.
Yeah, it ain't happening.
Well, and that's what we all do, unfortunately, because we live in a very fast-paced world. And so we don't always have time to, really stop and analyze and think about, wait a minute, I can't just look at the package and think I know who this person is. Because, most of the time our guesses are right. And so that just reinforces, look at the person, figure them out, I know how to interact with them. Or we look at the person and we see the physical characteristics, but we're progressive enough to say, okay, so I see Tracy and she's a black woman, but, that doesn't really tell me who she is. So I pretend I don't see that, or I don't at least allow that to make me just deal with Tracy based on stereotypes. I'm going to get to know her first. And so, but we don't always do that. We're moving too fast, and the world is not slowing down. And so, what I tell, we're not going to be able to evaluate every person we come into contact with individually. But when it's important to do that is when we are either in a situation where everybody's new to us and we're navigating new and we're building relationships, or if we're in a situation where what we are saying or doing is not working. we're not getting the result we thought we were going to get, then there's a good chance that there's something going on that may not just be by ethnicity, but definitely if it could be based on race or ethnicity, could be based on age or any kind of cultural norm. And no, it's not just, it's not just like Hispanic or someone who speaks a different language. It's really, for me, I'm really sad a lot when I'm doing the work with organizations, because there's a part of me that, really did believe 20 years ago that we would be much further along of accepting people as individuals and all working together and interacting together in our cities. And we have as many stereotypes to face now, if not more, than we did then.
All right, now I'm going to kind of shift our focus here a little bit. Is it stereotypes, or is it because we're just really having a hard time loving each other? Kind of not in a romantic Valentine's sense, since it is Valentine's Day, but, just in a general sense of we can't open our hearts to other people.
I do think that is, I do think that that's well put, well said, Rita, because we live in this day and age in a very competitive society where you're rewarded for being the best. Survival sometimes makes us rely on and look out for myself and my closest people, whether they're family or friends. And so in a competitive world, it's kind of like we often act as if everybody outside of our little small bubble is out to get us or is an enemy, or we have to get ours before they get theirs, and just in case there's nothing left. And so this idea of loving everyone, really, like I just love you because you exist in the world and I love people, that we don't live it. We might think it, but we don't live it.
Well, that sucks. Well, I mean, because it just, it's interesting because that was kind of like the whole 60s things. I mean, I was just having a conversation the other day about the whole 60 thing. Where did the flower children go? I remember growing up, and we must be about the same age, but I remember growing up, and the hippies and the free love. But anyway, all right, I didn't, whatever. We'll just pass that one by. But with this thought in my mind that, when I'm older, this group would be ahead of me, the women's libbers and the free thinkers and question authority, and government, society would just be different. There would be this sense of love. There would be this sense of compassion. It would be like going to one giant Grateful Dead concert or something, where there would be this give and take of energy that happened in the 60s, but that really didn't manifest at all.
No, because as folks who were in the love generation and the hippies and all of that, what happened, was when they finally started having kids and having to raise them and provide for them, and wanting to be, wanting to have a house and, it's again that thing of you have ideals, but then you have to live in the real world. And so you get jobs and then you want promotions and you find the only way to make a certain amount of money is to do certain things. And you still have an idealistic, view of the world and care about things, but you get busy being a mom, a dad, a teacher in a school or doing whatever your job is. And it kind of just gets watered down. And then you want the best for your kids, right? So you want to vote for things that are going to provide the environment for your kids. So it's not, we are so much better off, as this generation compared to the previous generation. My dad, I'm only one, I guess I'm two steps removed from slavery, but my dad, when he was a young boy, he and his dad and his brothers had to be whisked away in secret in a rush before nightfall because luckily there was a white man in the community who got the word to them that they were going to be lynched that night, and they needed to disappear so they wouldn't be lynched that night. And in some ways you think, well, that's ancient history, or that was, 4 generations ago. But no, that was 1 generation ago for me.
I have actually, God rest his soul, this a good friend, Andre, African-American gentleman, and he grew up, I think, in Chicago, in the north. But his family lived in Arkansas, I think. I don't know, in the South somewhere. And he said that he remembered going to his grandfather's house, and they, had some land. And in the field next door was this little boy, this little white boy. And so he was like calling to the kid and, wanted to play because they were about the same age. And he said his granddad almost had a heart attack and he got to talking to,
Yes.
And I just, and then recently, actually on Martin Luther King Day, they were showing the Martin Luther King films, and which I was kind of surprised that whole thing transpired over a garbage truck dispute, which I didn't even know that before. But if you sit there and watch it, it's like, really that oppression for black people was really, it's still really fresh.
Yeah, it is. And I think that that also affects certain conversations we have because when people will say, well, I didn't personally do anything. I don't know why black people are so angry. I didn't do anything, And the idea is that that stuff all happened so far in the past, but the stories and it really is. If you think about your parent, or your grandparent experiencing that, and that being in the psyche of the family and the community, or even more recent than that, in the 50s and 60s when the Tuskegee syphilis incident or pattern, where the U.S. government did research on men from the black community, but didn't tell them that they were withholding drugs from them, and a whole generation of black men basically were infected with syphilis syphilis, and died and had all these horrendous health care issues as they got older, and they were abandoned. The whole idea that research was being done on the black community, and it was documented that, well, they won't ask questions and we just won't tell them. That's what we're doing. So there's a lot in the psyche of the group that is still alive. Now, I even saying that, and whenever I say that, I also want to say, I don't say that as an excuse for there to be anger and miscommunication. I just say it as an example of any time that you only have the perspective from your own group, whatever that group is, then that's why it becomes hard to build a bridge, because I don't even reach out or inquire or research to find out what another perspective is. And to give an example of that, yes, we automatically get into black and white, and there are lots of examples. It's a really rich discussion. But if you look at the black community and then you think about diversity from another perspective, not race, but just people with disabilities of all races. There's somebody who's black and healthy and has not had a major disability, has no idea often how to interact with someone who's blind, or someone who has a hearing impairment. If I don't know sign language, American Sign Language, it's hard for me to communicate with someone who is hearing impaired. So that's, no matter what group we are in, there are other groups that we can only know how to interact with if we extend ourselves to learn about them and to demonstrate love for them in the form of respect and compassion.
Well, and I, like you hear about this in the workforce, but I don't even think many people realize the level of discrimination that women receive. You hear about it regarding pay.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was talking to somebody and they go, well, I'm a minority and blah, 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 and I get discriminated against. And it's like, dude, you're talking to me for one, and you're not the only one that gets discriminated against. It's like women are constantly discriminated against in the workforce. And it's not about the money part, but it's about, oh, you might have two things between your ears and it's not boobs. So even though, when I was working in the workforce, if I went on an interview, I did go very cute looking. And it did work for me, but I still demanded, required that they treated me right and took me seriously. I mean, I remember this one job. I got the job managing this department, and all of the old timers, old ex-military guys. Okay, so we'll just start there. Ex-military guys. They're like, oh yeah, that girl, oh, that girl. Well, that lasted for about 6 months when they finally figured out that, oh, she runs a tight ship and she knows what she's doing, and she'll cover your butt if you're nice to her. But if you're not nice to her, she will just let you sink right down and not take care of any of your crap. So, yeah. Anyway. Why is it so hard for us? Why is it so hard for us to move past this?
I think and this is, opinion as much as research. I mean, it's research, but it's also opinion. I just see so many people all over the nation, and it's mostly unintentional. We're just very focused on ourselves, especially in the U.S. and maybe, U.S. and Canada, but definitely in the U.S. Our culture values the individual. Our USA culture values the individual independence, and, individual accomplishment and achievement. And so, in other parts of the world, there are actually countries and cultures that value the group or the family as a unit more than we do in the U.S. And so the idea that what you do affects the whole community, and we're all a community, is much bigger in other parts of the world, and they don't have some of the issues expressed the way that we have them. So when I'm just looking out for myself, and that's what I get rewarded for, and that's what I've been educated to do and trained to do, and look at all the people around me who I consider successful, and not just financially successful, but navigating life successful. Wow, if that's, they're looking out for number one. And think about it. Most of the people we are mostly around are people who are more like us than unlike us. Now, that may be by race and ethnicity, but it may be by economics. So, the comment a little bit earlier in the chat room about, I got along with a lot of people, but we were all poor. Well, yeah, so it could be that the socioeconomic bubble is the one that makes you all alike, and then you don't trust the people who are from a different economic group or from a different neighborhood, from the suburbs instead of the city, from Connecticut instead of from the Bronx. So it's that we're not accustomed to it. We're not taught in school how to really build the bridge, and so we don't do it. And, and then the one other thing that comes to mind that is unfortunately true, when we look at our media in general, I love the fact that there's internet radio now and podcasts, and I have a lot more opportunity to choose a positive message or to target, topics that are of interest to me. But if we just look at mainstream news and mainstream TV, it's very much focused on, battling people who aren't like you, being the winner and putting everybody else down, violence and things that are sensational and the extreme. And so that's what that's what we look for, and that's what we notice in our own lives. And we have to change that. We can't look outside of ourselves to change that.
Well, and to me, it almost like takes it and it's like, oh, here's something else to throw into that. Oh, yeah, we need to change it pile.
Well, only we can change ourselves, right? So, the connection, one of the things that you do, Dr. Rita, so well with this show, with your radio show, and just who you are in the world, is even though you say so easily, well, I'm going to be politically incorrect, or I'm going to push the envelope. You do a really amazing job of creating an energy and a space where people can just kind of show up, and so and people are attracted to that because you can bring in all different kinds of energy and see how it mixes together. But a lot of people don't do that well.
Woohoo, for me. That's because I'm a white girl. Ah!
That's because you're funny. And so that really is when I give advice to people, which isn't all that often, it's like if you want to have a different environment in your community or in your workplace where there are all different kinds of people by culture, and that could be ethnicity or sexual orientation or age group or different interests, then the way to do that is to be the one who says, I'm going to meet and get to know five people who are different from me. And then I'm going to go to the things they go to, and I'm going to invite them to the things that I like to do. Because part of it is not just inviting people into what you like, but to extend yourself into the things that they like and the environments they're comfortable in, because that's really how you grow.
Well, yeah, because sometimes people are just afraid to go near it, touch it, interact with it. I'm going to share a very quick story. My kids, they're my stepkids, and I love Asian food. I cook a lot of Asian food. And so when I married their dad, I would make pot stickers or sumai or whatever. And they had never eaten Chinese food. And I'm like, You're killing me here. So I make this stuff, and I swear to God, I make these pot stickers. They take a long time to make. They're not hard. It's just time consuming because you have to wrap each one like a ravioli. And they peeled the wrapper off each and every one of those, left it on their dish, and just ate the meat from the inside. Which I never made them for. It was 10 years later when I made them again. And we're like, why didn't you ever make these before? It's like, I did. Now it's their favorite thing. But they just never were exposed. And I think your conversation about, exposing yourself to these new experiences, new people, new energies is great.
Yeah. Can I not can I.
You got a little over a minute.
I know. So Joe says that, he really doesn't like it when there's race warfare or class warfare or any of that stuff. And so what I just posted in the chat was, I agree with that. So let's all make a commitment to turn away from the warfare between class, between race, between gender, between sexual orientation. Turn away from the warfare and be examples of love affair. And it's Valentine's Day, so let's be that love, let's be that respect. We can do that, and if enough of us do that in our individual lives, it will change the culture.
You said love fest, right?
Love
fair.
Oh. Warfare to love fair.
I like that better. But I'm a bad girl. Anyway, Tracy, the music's going to come up here in a second, so I need to say goodbye. Great time talking to you. This was a good conversation. Very good.
Anytime. I love it. I'm honored to ask, and I listen, so I'll be listening, and I'm always around.
Okie dokie. All right, Tracy, I'm going to let you go. That's right. Tracy Brown. Her webpage is tracybrown.com. And next week, we're going to have Jeffrey Gonzalez talking about strange lights over Sacramento. In the second hour, our good friend Monique Chapman talking about tapping into universal energy to reclaim your power. So until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Happy Valentine's Day. Spend the rest of the evening with your loved ones. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser